Hello, everybody, and welcome to Show Studio's live panel discussions. Here we are, day one of Milan Fashion Week. And in these discussions, we brought together experts from all parts of the industry to discuss, debate, be controversial, comment, generally analyze the most important Fashion Week shows of the season. So today, we're actually going to be discussing Jil Sander's Spring-Summer Womenswear collection. And I'm going to, first of all, turn to my lovely panelists and ask them to say a little bit about themselves before we kind of just have a really nice conversation. So, Nassia, over to you. Tell us a little bit about yourself here in London.
Hello, thank you for having me. My name is Nassia Matsa. I'm a writer and a model. I'm writing on fashion, tech, and culture. And I have modeled for the likes of Prada, Balenciaga, not Jil Sanders yet. And I'm really excited to be here.
Great, thank you. José, let me introduce you and you tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, hello. Thank you so much for having me. My name is José, Criales-Unzueta. I'm originally from Bolivia, but I live in Brooklyn right now. I'm mainly a fashion designer. I was trained as a designer, but I'm also a writer as well. So now I currently work as both writer and designer. I write mainly about fashion from a perspective of culture, specifically queerness and kind of like internet culture. So that's kind of where my writing direction goes. And yeah, I'm just very excited to just have this conversation with everyone.
Yeah, it's going to be very exciting to see this show. And last but definitely not least, Tuba, there you are in Germany. Tell us a bit about you.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Well, I actually am a product manager and work in a French company in the marketing segment. Well, fashion is actually just my passion, and I started sharing like fashion critiques and content on YouTube. And this is how I spend my time with fashion, and also a huge designer fanatic. So this is why I'm very excited for the upcoming show.
So you're a YouTube expert, like the rest of us. Well, I'm sure that in true fashion tradition, we will be joining the live show just as soon as it starts. But in the meantime, you know, Jil Sander is such a kind of fascinating brand. I mean, launched by the eponymous Jil Sander herself, and then in and out of a company, you know, taken over by Prada, and then design creative director of Raf Simons and everything. Nassia, if I come to you first, we now have this incredibly talented design duo behind the brand. Give us a little quick overview of the Jil Sander brand, since Jil herself not part of it.
So for me, well, Jil Sander is all about minimalism, and is how making a work uniform chic and cool without being heavy. And obviously, when it comes to designs, the structure and the forms, it would be it would be interesting for me to see how this work uniform will be transformed, and how sort of like I feel that we're shifting towards maximalism. So I would be interesting to see how it will become relevant. Like, it's very interesting that the design duo, their background has to, you know, it's more Supreme and Balenciaga, so quite different to Jil Sander. So it would be interesting to see the touch and how it will transform.
Yes, I mean, it's interesting you touch on maximalism because of course, and I'm coming to Tuba now. Tuba, Jil Sander was known as minimalist, and I feel as if they're moving perhaps the brand into a direction of more softness, more femininity. Maybe that's pandemic, maybe that's just the way we live now. Do you see it still as true minimalism?
Well, I would say that more like the vision of minimalism for us in our zeitgeist has changed, and not that they are not minimalistic anymore. I still think they embody the vision of purism and minimalism and their architectural sculptures. We still see that in their fabrics, in their cuts, and their designs. So I wouldn't say it's not minimalistic anymore. It's definitely not the 90s anymore. I guess it's more like that. This is also something we saw at Miuccia Prada, for example, in the 90s. And now we can also call it something that went very maximalistic. But it still has minimalistic features, since it's still inspired by sportswear and comfiness, and at the same time still the sophistication of the products. And this is something where we see maybe a bit different cuts, disruptive designs that makes it seem like it's maximalistic, for example, but I would still say it still embodies the core of the minimalistic features that we saw from Jil Sander.
I mean, that's so interesting about the philosophy behind how you can actually be minimalist to begin with and embrace minimalism through maximalism. As a designer, Jose, and I noticed, that this is a brand that expresses its philosophy through its retail as well. I mean, you look at the John Pawson flagship in both Tokyo, Otomo-sando, and also in Paris. This is a kind of extension in every single way. As a designer, how would you see their interpretation of what we might call purity?
I think purity is a really good way of putting it, but I would still call it minimalism. I think really right now, when we look at fashion today, our idea of what minimalist fashion looks like, it's very tied to Phoebe Celine, for example. Everyone has that specific idea. Yeah. And that's one version of, right? As a designer, there's many different ways from where we take inspiration. You can be informed by minimalism, but there's different facets of it, right? And I think when you still look at Jil Sander, the core of it, the values of it, again, the proportion, the cut, the silhouettes, all of it is still very rooted in those practices. Obviously, it has evolved over time. I think it had to really to just not, again, it's a brand that has been around for so long. It really still has to be attractive people. It has to talk to youth as well. So I think it has evolved into purity, into a lot of emotion right now. There's a lot more graphicality, I think, in terms of the proportion and the cut. But I think that at its core, it still talks back to those essential values of like minimalist design, right?
Yeah. I mean, you see, that's where I think it's really interesting that for the first time, we actually have a couple, both in life and in profession, doing this. And Nassia, the idea of, Luke being behind the Supreme label, for example, and, Lucie kind of being at Dior, Balenciaga, I mean, or Louis Vuitton even. I mean, this idea of high-low and this kind of interesting meeting, is that more sort of adapting to the future, do you think?
Yes, definitely. And I think from a business point of view, it makes sense because Jil Sanders, with the move of collaborating with Uniqlo a couple of years ago, they attracted the millennial way of minimalism. So sort of like it's what you said, Jose, that minimalism is changing. So sort of like it's attracted the millennial target group. So it would be interesting. Well, it makes sense to invite someone who has worked for Supreme and Balenciaga and reinvent minimalism in order to attract the Gen Z audience, which is a big trend.
Yeah, I agree. And, it's so interesting too, but because I was just reading in the New York Times recently, and I saw this fabulous mixture between her Italian heritage, born and grew up in Zermatt, one of the most beautiful places, and her favorite pastas and the restaurants her parents run. And then here he is, Vancouver, Canada. I mean, you could not get more different in terms of a kind of thinking or a philosophy. You could call it sort of northern and southern almost. I mean, I know they're in the mountains, but this kind of combination from your marketing perspective, how do you see them as putting that message out there in the way they design?
Well, first of all, I think it's the best thing that could actually happen to this label because it challenges the label to not be only that minimalistic and very puristic brand a lot, but also, widen the horizon kind of. I think if you have somebody in the design team who comes from Supreme, which is very marketing oriented actually, we see that maybe in the latest collections also implementing some logos is very Gen Z oriented. These are things I guess the core Jil Sander fans aren't very happy to see because we see that this is not something the brand actually stands for and that it embodies, but this is something that drives the sales at the end of the day. So this is completely fine for me, for example, but I still do want to see the Balenciaga and the Dior times of Lucie Meier definitely here. And as long as the design is not seeing any lack of it, I think it's very good actually, because I think Jil Sander also had some issues previously before the Meyers came. So I guess they had this peak with Raf Simons since 2015, and then we saw a decline here, and I guess that the combination of the two designers definitely helped to improve that a little more. And now that that they were bought again, I guess Jil Sander will definitely shine again in the next years.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting point, actually. Jose, I mean, you know, without being sort of too cliched about it, the yin and the yang of sort of two different viewpoints of the same brand, as opposed to it all resting on one designer's shoulders, must bring not just sort of two sides and balance, but also a kind of more holistic approach. Is that the way we're headed, do you think? Sustainability, more holistic approaches, more in the round, perhaps, than when Jil Sander originally launched in the 90s, when it was kind of quite linear and directional?
I mean, I would like to believe so. I think it definitely has allowed them to look at the brand 360 and really understand what the brand needs versus what the brand has, and really evolve and refine that vision. I think it's very telling when you compare the menswear deliveries versus the womenswear, for example, where the logos are. The menswear tends to be more graphic. The menswear tends to be maybe a bit younger. But I do think when we're talking in terms of sustainability, in terms of the holistic versions of a brand, I don't think Jil Sander is the brand I specifically think of when we start having that conversation. I would like to see that eventually those conversations are part of it. But I think at the same time, they are buzzwords. In the end, sustainability right now is one of the biggest marketing techniques, right? Very few people are actually sustainable. So I would much rather the design be honest and authentic, and really them focus on the brand and what the brand needs, that they try to come to us and say like, hey, we're being sustainable and we're being really holistic and we're really being this and that and that, and then the clothes don't tell me that, right? I think in the end, something that we see a lot is that there's a lot of narrative and a lot of discourse behind the collection, and then the clothes don't speak that. And I think Jil Sander is the opposite, right? There's no need to speak very loudly and show 1,000 like pages of show notes. The clothes are there, and then they should speak for themselves. And I think they're doing a good job at that so far.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right, because when you're saying that, of course, the word that's coming to mind to me, Nassia, tell me if you agree or disagree, is authenticity. You know, the whole kind of mise van der rohe, less is more principle, which we know about with minimalism, and where the roots and the DNA of the brand are and everything else like that. But if you look at how they're still, in a sense, reverting to that DNA and just doing kind of pristine, pure shape and, you know, cut and blocks of color, I mean, or an accent. I mean, it's not exactly, I mean, I'm looking at your beautiful flowers, but it's not kind of, you know, patterns and textiles, or indeed what I've heard recently being talked about, dopamine fashion. You know, let's go bright pink or electric this and stimulate our pandemic brains. How would you respond to the authenticity question?
Well, it's interesting, before I respond to your questions, it's interesting that you say that, because I've read in the press release that this sort of like this show's theme is going to be optimism and positivity. And we've seen that Jil Sander doesn't incorporate that much color, but they might have a few sorbets. So it will be interesting to see sort of like how they reinvent the authenticity. And again, we know the lines and minimalism for sort of like Jil Sander, so it will be interesting to see how they incorporate what you said that goes against to the sort of brand in a way.
Yeah,
color,
absolutely.
Color. So yeah, I've seen sorbets in the press release, and I was like, oh, okay, I'll be interesting to see and how this will happen.
Well, that little sort of lavender lozenge and that kind of lilac thing. I mean, the word that I read, which seems completely anti-minimalist, is fuzzy. And I keep reading this word that they've been using recently called fuzzy. And I'm thinking, is that fabric? Is that materiality? Is that fuzzy thinking, fuzzy logic? What do you think, Tuba, about this idea behind this latest collection, which of course we haven't seen yet, so we don't know. But
yeah, well, when I hear fuzzy, I definitely think of a fabric or a texture, and not of a color or anything. And I mean, since this is spring summer fuzziness, also, I mean, I also associate like a lavender field or something like that, you know, like I imagine bees and stuff. And but since I'm here to see some sharp silhouettes, I'm very excited, since I do not want to see too much softness here. And whenever something goes too much into rosé and lavender, I think it can tend to be like very feminine, very intimate, very sensitive things, very maybe like comfier fitting again. Well, I do not think that the Meyers will disappoint here, but I mean, we saw motifs previously in their collections. They have a lot of different motifs actually that they have used, and also in different colors. But I think these were usually like single items that were in the collection to pop out a little bit, to make it a bit more refreshing, and not that beige, white, black image that we're used to see like overall. So I think these were like single items. I'd really like to see how that, how they implement that throughout the collection.
Yeah, it'd be fascinating.
I like these beige looks. I mean, I cannot say anything against it. I love it. It's beautiful.
But I mean, you know, Jose, it's interesting, this idea that we talk about fuzzy as materiality, or, you know, pops of color, or whatever we're saying, but it also, it's like you feel a bit fuzzy when you feel a bit kind of warm and emotional, you know, and it's maybe it's goodbye to kind of what used to be a criticism, which was it's cold, it's not human, it's not, you know, it's just too uniform and it's too rigid. I mean, a lot of people like that, and a lot of people never wore it because it was like that. Maybe it's this blurring of how we are as human beings today that they're trying to project. What do you think?
I think it does have to do a lot with what we have been seeing these past few months, these past few seasons in fashion. Really, there's a lot of focus on quote unquote joy. You know, there's a lot of conversation like, oh, fashion is joyful, colorful.
Joy,
I mean,
yes. Joy.
Right. And I, for example, I used to only wear black. Very recently, I started wearing a lot of color. I mean, like I'm wearing a rainbow right now. And this is not like something that I would usually wear before the pandemic, but recently I've become more colorful.
Yeah.
And I think it's designers that have ushered in that like sort of more joyful or more colorful perspective within fashion that are so popular right now. For example, Christopher Rogers, who's what I'm wearing, right? That have sort of made people really think of, okay, like what are we looking at? What do we want to wear, etc. And I think that's where kind of this sort of joy and fuzzy feeling of fashion and warmth kicks in. But I do also think that it has a lot to do with what we see happening in other brands that would sit next to a Jil Sander in retail, right? Like when you think of Daniel Lee's work at Bottega, when you think of a Proenza here in New York, there is that fuzzy, like actual textural component. There is, and a lot of it comes from Phoebe as well, right? But there is that component of the touch. Like Daniel Lee loves a knit, for example, right?
Yeah.
Loves those fuzzy like fringes that provides a good edge in terms of that minimal. Like it's a nice juxtaposition when you have something very sharp, like a tailor coat, for example, but then the bag is very soft, right? That's an interesting juxtaposition. And I think market-wise, it makes sense because a lot of these brands that sit next to what would have been Phoebe Celine, what is Daniel Lee's Bottega, what is a Proenza, are looking to really comp each other out, right? Like I think very honestly, also I work as a designer for a large brand. So like a lot of what we do is look at each other. That's kind of what we have to do, right? Because we have to satisfy a customer and we also have to get that customer back. So if we see that the customer is going to go buy the Bottega Veneta soft pouch, we're going to do one as well, right? I think it has a lot to do with that. And I think trying to bring it into like, oh, it's a fuzzy feeling and colors, it makes sense. It's part of the narrative, but looking at it very pragmatically is also part of what people are buying. So it has to come in eventually.
So in a way, you know, the realism, the pragmatism of what you might call what used to be a kind of hard red line between commerce and culture. And, you know, when Jil Sander herself launched the brand, you know, back in the 70s and then took it on. It was very much, it's not about making money, it's just about my vision and, you know, this is where I'm at and all the rest of it. And I think there is maybe this is the fuzzy thing, you know, I think there is a reality check that's set in, especially in a world where we're facing kind of, you know, climate and pandemic and quite a lot of the other interesting political things as well. I mean, now, you know, Nassia, one of the things I'm interested in is that they're both teaching now at the MAC in Vienna, and which is where Hussein Chalayan taught before and led the fashion department. And that's a really interesting building. So many great people have come out of it. You know, Hans Hollein's daughter is now running it, Lily Hollein. And I think that sort of Central European home of the secession gives a voluptuousness that perhaps has sort of, you know, rubbed over the edges of the hard minimalism as was. What do you think? Is that informing them?
Well, sort of like we need a bit of luxury, and going back to sort of like the point about joy, and it's almost a response. Like fashion is a response to what's happening in the society. So, said Jose, it's true in terms of like brands not copying each other. We say it's a conversation. It's a conversation between the brands, and it's a conversation between society as well. So in terms of like hard lines, like we all need a bit of optimism, and we all need a bit of luxury. And even if it comes from architecture, again, architecture is a conversation with people because we live in it. So yes, I'd say that. Tell me, yes.
Well, it's interesting because, the conversation between architecture and fashion, I think, has become more and more relevant because, the days when fashion led and then everybody followed that trend and that was sort of it, as opposed to allowing you to be your own self and live or work within an environment in the clothes that you were wearing. I sort of feel as if these two are bringing that sensibility of real living without being boring about it. And they're leading, but they're not necessarily following, but they're more realistic about the way we live now.
Exactly. And it's what you said, that I think fashion is not really creating the trends anymore because we have internet and everything is super fast. So it's more of a discussion, and going back to sort of like the business way of thinking as well. Like if you have to compete with a company like Bottega, which is one of the hottest name right now, how are you going to respond to this? How are you going to make your customer come back?
And actually picking up on the techno side of it, I mean, how much do you think technology is actually playing a part in what these two in particular at Jil Sander are doing? I know it's happening everywhere in the fashion world, but, they seem to have a kind of resonance with technology in the way they design.
This goes to me, yeah?
Sorry, Nassia,
yeah. Well, sort of like technology is everything right now. And again, fashion and technology go hand in hand together. You have to correspond to new technologies in order for your customer to go back. And sort of like the fact that we're like looking at Uniqlo, which is a more fast fashion sort of like company, but incorporating the latest technologies, it just shows that they're really on top of the game when it comes to that. I think their challenge is how to tackle Bottega from a business way.
Okay, all right. I want to get Tuba's perspective on this actually, because I think it's fascinating, the idea that Jose just introduced about the competition, and as a designer, we're all looking at each other and you were saying following each other, I'm saying point of differentiation. And how do you make your own brand do that classic thing of standing out from other people if you're all doing the same kind of thing, i.e. clothes, bags, accessories, shoes, etc.?
Well, I definitely share Jose's opinion here, because I think the absence of Phoebe Philo definitely created a huge gap that needed and could be filled with different designers such as Princess Gula or Bottega now, or Peter Doe, who's also from Phoebe Philo's team and who worked with her for 2 years, such as Daniel Lee. And we saw all these brands evolving. The Rose started to rise immensely. Then there are like Swedish brands like Totem. So these brands weren't that successful like 5 years ago. And I think in the first hand, they are definitely successful because we do not have the old Celine anymore. And on the other hand, it's definitely because I think the vision of fashion changed for many people, because authenticity was never as important as it is today. Authenticity is also the main driver of the Meiers at Jil Sander, for example. They do not create anything that they do not trust in, and that they do not see in a collection. And that's what something, for example, Luke Meier also doesn't do with his own personal brand, OEMC.
Yeah.
He says, well, you can create very slowly, not too many items, but you have to stay true to yourself. And this is something we see in these labels, for example, Peter Doe, who are very authentic, who share a lot of information about themselves, about their construction, about the production. We see that in social media, it has never been that open to the customers. And maybe Daniel Lee is a bit more exclusive here, and is not sharing too much content, deleting Instagram and everything. But we see that authenticity is more important than ever. And I think many people and many designers jump on that train. Also Prensa, also these New York brands that jump on that train of minimalism and also authenticity, because we're actually going back to that androgynous looks, because this is what they are. We still have menswear and womenswear, but many of these looks actually are unisex. So and this is also like this whole main driver, and I think this whole situation that we are in since like 2 years has led to the fact that, okay, what do we actually need? Well, to me, the philosophy of the brand Jil Sander is actually like the lack of any excess. You know, there is no there's nothing that can be reduced. Everything designed, every part of the look needs to be there, and there's no excess in fabric or cuts about it. So now we're coming back to that minimalistic point, and I think this is what many people who stayed at home, didn't go to work, realized, well, how important is actually, for example, money to me. The most important thing is to have a comfortable home, to have comfortable clothing, beautiful clothing. I myself as a person, am more important than I thought. I thought a handbag is the most important thing, but it's actually, you know, this whole concentration of oneself is huge. And this was led by this whole situation we are in for 2 years now. So this is why I also think that many designers kind of not replicate each other, but get also influenced by each other.
No, I think that's true. And that brings us back to you, Jose, and your point about how designers are looking out for each other. I mean, you know, this sharing and this much more kind of open source, if you like, discussion where actually, you know, I mean, I hate to say it in this lovely show studio, but actually we're all on Instagram and we can all be caption writers and photographers and we can all do sketches. I mean, like mine aren't very good, but this authenticity and revealing the process as a kind of basic philosophy of trust now, which is, you know, in a world where we distrust a lot and there's disinformation and everything else, to have a basic trust is great, but does it take the mystique out of it? But how did they do that moment? You know, I mean, for you as a designer, this balance between we need to know everything, we need to trust in everything, the basics, as you say, and everything has a purpose, as you were saying, Tuba. But does it lose the mystique? Is the wonder kind of gone, or is it still there? You're on mute.
Sorry, there was like a lot of like honking, you know, in New York, so I had to mute myself. But I do think the mystique is always going to be there. I think the reality is that maybe for us that we're so close to fashion, we maybe know too much, right? Sometimes we know too much. When I look at a collection, I'm like, why is the pattern cut that way? Or like, oh, why is it not on the bias? Or, oh, something, you know, like, because that's the way my brain works, right? Yeah. I think since we are so close, sometimes the mystique is gone because, again, we're so informed, right? Like when I go into Instagram, the people that I follow talk about fashion all the time, right? So it's inescapable. But I think when you zoom out, when you look at a customer, for example, that's not the case, right? Like for Peter, there's a good example. Like I went to his show 2 weeks ago in New York. It was his first runway show. And I posted like a few videos, a few slow motion videos, etc. And I talked about the construction of one specific shirt dress, for example. And everyone was like, wow, this is amazing, right? And Peter yesterday, he posted a photo of like the different ways in which you can dress it. And people are still amazed by it, right? There is still a sort of like wonder behind how things actually get done, or like, why do things get done? I think the mystique is never going to disappear in that sense, but I also think it's very much a generational thing, right? I think when you look at designers like Peter or Christopher Rogers or James Flemons from Flemons, all these different designers that love to share versus designers that are older that are maybe not as used to sharing. I think an exception is maybe Pier Paolo from Valentino, right? He loves to post everything on Instagram, and it's so fun to see like his BTS of couture, for example. But I think the sharing hasn't taken away from the mystique. I think the mystique is always going to be there.
I think that's fascinating. I mean, you know, coming to you, Nassia, you're both, as you said, you're a model and a writer. So you wear it, you have to experience it, but you're also critiquing it. So you've got the two hats on, and this multi-layered approach that younger generations are now much more adept at. You know, older generations, perhaps, I mean, I'm wildly stereotyping here, but older generations might be more in their professions and doing what they do, but the adaptability of younger people to be able to write, model, film, whatever. I mean, is this something that's coming through in the collections of the Jil Sander duo, do you think?
Yes, absolutely. And going to sort of like talking about the Mystique, I think it doesn't take away the Mystique. If anything, it enhances it, because sort of like it doesn't matter if you see the backstage. It doesn't matter if you see how something is being made. If anything, it just makes it more interesting and you're more invested in it. And again, from a business point of view, it makes sense. It's more engaging to the customer. So it's changing, but in a way, yes, it's less mysterious, but maybe our need to be mysterious is not there anymore.
Okay, so this brings me to the next question, which I'm going to ask Tuba, but I want you all to think about it, which is I want to know who owns a piece of Jil Sander, right? That's kind of important. And before we get to that question, and why and what it is, but before we get to that, you talked about the customer. Now, you know, each label, each brand used to have a very defined customer, and we used to know who the Celine customer was when Phoebe Philo was there. We used to know the Jil Sander customer. Do we know the Jil Sander customer? Is it one tribe or is it multiple layers these days?
I think they're trying to change the customer they are trying to reach to, because that's what actually every old heritage brand is trying to achieve right now, because they all have the maybe elderly people who definitely appreciate the high quality, but me as well, you know, I'm still a person craving for quality. That's like the only criteria I have almost. But let's be honest, if we look at TikTok and Twitch and Gen Z, and these are the consuming friendly people out there, they usually do not like the Jil Sander aesthetics, I would say.
It's interesting.
Definitely not their color code, not their cuts. So this is also where I think they try to get a bit younger, and they have to do that to stay alive actually out there. But I think there actually is a typical customer that they certainly have created, a persona who is a person that craves for quality, that also can afford the clothes, which is not as easy as it seems, because I think the mystiqueness, for example, still will exist because it still is not approachable for so many people. And since you cannot own a piece, it will stay a mystique because you cannot even get close to it, even if you see a lot of videos about it.
But you own Jil Sander. Little Dicky Bird told me that you have Jil Sander pieces.
Well, I have some Jil Sander pieces, but I really love the brand and the aesthetics and their vision, because this whole storyline about a brand is also very important to me. So that means that their marketing has worked very well, because I believe it. No, I definitely believe it. I know all their fabrics come from Italy. They produce there, and that actually makes like half of the price of the products that we see is just the production in Europe actually nowadays. Yeah, but that's totally fine to me, because I know that the Meiers have sat there and designed these things that create these silhouettes around my body, that create this sculptural and architectural lines around your body. It seems like to me, even though they say in their latest interviews that they try to create clothing that people can wear and they give lives to these pieces, it's more like the pieces give a life to you. I feel like they have their own identity because they are so strong and empowering that if you pull it over, you feel like a person. And this, in my opinion, is the vision that they can sell very well. And that works well. So I would say they have a customer, but they're trying to change it, I would say.
And so would you say, just to sort of wrap that thought up, that actually the pieces are not they're not kind of gallery pieces, sort of look, don't touch, that this life that they have, their own life that they have, start taking on the persona of each individual woman, man, person carrying a handbag, wearing a pair of shoes, that takes on their character. So there's no tribe anymore.
Well, in my opinion, it is like that. I don't feel like people wearing, if I would see a whole group of people wearing a certain Jil Sander look, I would certainly feel like this is very Jil Sander and wouldn't say this is a cool tribe showing a different vision of the brand, because the pieces usually are that strong. And this actually speaks for the design and the both designers. They are that strong and empowering. And we see that also in their fabrics. They have felt like fabrics that are that thick and strong that you usually use for, I don't know, your sofa or a couch. They do not look like, to me, it doesn't seem like, I mean, José knows that a lot better, definitely, but they are very strong fabrics usually, or like organza-like fabrics. And yeah, that's why I think usually the pieces have their own lives and they speak a very strong language and have this artisanal and avant-garde flair. And they say that they get very strongly inspired by haute couture as well. And I would definitely say that if you look at the lining and stuff, I mean, I'm really like going into these dresses and looking at all the draping and lines, and I'm like, okay, how is this possible? This is cool. This is not ready to wear.
Oh, the beauty of well-made clothing, my God. I mean, you know, we mustn't forget the menswear line, which came along a bit later, Jose, and you know, it was launched with womenswear and very successfully too. But, you know, I know so many people who have suits by Jil Sander. I mean, and you look at them and it's just like one colorway and, you know, maybe 10 different suits, 10 different jackets, 10 different trousers, all by the same designer. And I look at them and I think, how do you know how you're going to look different from day to day? Or is the idea to wear a uniform? We're back to this idea of uniform again.
I mean, the idea of uniform is very fascinating in terms of what fashion is right now, because I think what fashion was back then and what uniform was back then versus what it is now is quite different, right? I think when you think of menswear specifically, my dad, funnily enough, my dad always asks me this question, I think once a week. He's like, so do you think we're still going to wear suits to the office? Because he wears a suit every day, right? And I'm like, well, you can do whatever you want, right? And he's like, but can I? And I think there is this misconception, right, in terms of uniform, like what you're expected to wear versus what we see now. A lot has changed, right? When you look at the suits that we have on screen, the proportions are very different. They're loosened up, right? Now they're even sold mainly as separates, right? Now you don't necessarily go to the store and you buy the head-to-toe suit. You don't buy the three-piece. In most cases, you're buying the jacket and you're buying the trouser, maybe. So like the concept of uniform has evolved so much that I think uniform right now is very personal. So what you wear every day and what your uniform is very different to like what someone else's is going to be, right?
So it's not multiple people wearing the same, it's your uniform, it's an individual.
Exactly. It has become very much an individual uniform, but at the same time, fashion has a fascination with uniform. I think when you look at Tom Brown, for example, right, there are brands that are still designers are fascinated by the idea of a uniform. And I think it's also a generational thing, right? Like I grew up, I went to school, I went to Catholic school, so I wore a uniform and I was wearing every day my Dockers pants and they were like navy, and I was wearing my little polo shirt and my like Argyle sweater, and you know, like I was living that. So then nowadays you can't make me wear heather gray or navy because it reminds me of my school uniform. I personally have an aversion to uniforms, but then the people that have a fascination by them, right? So I think it has become a very personal and a very individual thing.
But you know, years ago when I was a stylist, years and years ago, working in New York, and all the clothes were shipped over from Milan, and we used to have Polaroids attached to them saying, this is the Valentino, this is the, you know, Alberto Ferretti, whatever it was, quite Dolce Gabbana, blah, 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 blah. And then we all went into kind of, you know, mix and match and do, you know, mix it up. The kind of, you know, Caroline Baker came along, Lawrence Corner here, and baseball boot shoes there with a bit of glitter and sequins. And yet the Jil Sander look is so perfect. I mean, I look at it and think, oh, I want to wear it all, but actually, can I live in it? Nassia, how do we interpret this uniform thought?
I love the uniform thought because I didn't wear a uniform when I was in school, so I'm fascinated by uniforms.
I wore uniform.
Yes, and when I was young, it was my dream to wear a uniform at school. So I'm like on the other side, sort of like fantasizing about uniforms. Yes, sort of like, yes, uniforms is a personal need, and now uniforms are different. But in the same time, I think uniforms have a certain sort of like status and elegance. So whenever you see uniform, it's almost, I don't know, at least for me, whenever sort of like I see a uniformed look, I always find it more elegant than mix and match.
Is it safe, the uniform? You're not sort of stepping out of line?
I don't know if it has to do with safety, but maybe safety in the eye, in the sense of nothing upsets the eye in terms of again of lines, and it's just easy in the eye. It just makes you okay.
You see, it's really interesting that you talk about easy on the eye. I mean, here we are in probably the most visual moment of our, 2,000, 3,000 year history, whatever, on the planet. And Jose was talking about, actually almost a bit like food is sometimes just photographed for Instagram, just to make it look really, really good on the screen. And I'm not going to say there are designers who are doing that. No, we're not going to say that. But I'm sure, technology-wise, with all of these virtual outfits that you can now buy to dress yourself up on Instagram and go out there. Where do you think, a brand like Jil Sander fits into this brave new world? And I invite Tuba, you to come in on this as well. This thought that Jose has sort of sparked about designing a uniform for oneself, but actually you can make that uniform anything you want to be on the screen, right? So, I mean, we're still going to go to shops, right? We're still going to go and buy and feel and try on, or is everything going to be kind of coming to our front doors like the milk?
I think it's both. So sort of like everything coming to a door, it's just easy. But on the other hand, we're human, and as much as I love internet, and I love sort of like, I love digital shows anyway, because it sparked creativity, and you had the chance to sort of like see the designer's vision outside of a uniform. But at the end of the day, we are all humans, and we all physical, and we like physical things. So we like textures. We like sort of like, when you say the word fuzzy, we immediately think of something, and this thing that we think, it's a physical fabric. So I think it's a balance. Maybe the experience of physical is, it's a more luxurious experience now, because you have to have the time, you have to focus on something, but on the other hand, you remember it. And
yes.
So like you're going to spend time in a shop and touch all the fabrics. The first thing that you see when you see a piece of clothing is just touch it, so you see how it feels. So, and we start.
And we started, exactly. We've started in the Jil Sander Spring Summer Show 2022, which is great. And we're going to look at this. I'm slightly looking at this the other way around. My God, we've got crazy patterning going on here.
Guys, I'm so sorry. We're having to watch live from Instagram, so it's slightly sideways, but we can still get a bit of a view. I'm sorry about that.
That's all right, Elise. I mean, I'm looking at what looks like leopard skin. It's kind of slightly upside down. So I'm going to turn to you, Tuba, and to you, Jose, because you've got the screen more in front of you, but you might be able to see it more direct on Nassia. I'm not sure. Okay, Tuba, any thoughts about what you're seeing so far?
Well, actually, the image that I have is very small, but first of all, I'm very shocked by the color, really. They literally went for this violet lavender color, so this is actually pretty surprising. I see these drapes around the necks again. The colors, I haven't seen a lot of color, actually. It has been brown and white yet. So like the classical Jil Sander colors, big earrings. The accessories are very important at Jil Sander. I mean, they're very successful in terms of shoes and handbags. And Jil Sander personally has always had a very strong focus on these accessories, because, funny story, she didn't like the typical jewelry, like necklaces and earrings, actually. She's just wearing a watch. So I feel like these looks are very, again, in this concept of comfortable wear. I think it looks a bit more loose a bit not that sculptural as we saw. Maybe okay, this is also the spring summer collection, so
Yeah,
you don't have to exaggerate.
Jose, let me bring you in here, and then I'll come to you, Nassia. What are your thoughts as you're seeing this coming? I mean, very simple, not necessarily minimalistic, I would say, but your thoughts?
I would say very expected so far. I think the only thing that I'm kind of like interested about is the animal print. I don't think I was necessarily expecting the show to open with a run of animal print. There goes the fuzziness, there goes the texture. I don't know. I'm just so far. I think it's basically what I was expecting. Again, I think when you think of Jil Sander, you have an expectation, and so far, Luke and Lucie really haven't strayed too far from that. So I would say, yeah, like I'm not surprised by what I'm seeing. It looks very aligned to what we would expect to see from the collection. But again, the animal print, I am fascinated by.
Let me come to you, Nassia, because both of our eyebrows shot up at that moment. In fact, I think all of our eyebrows shot up at that moment. And I'm looking at the trim. I'm looking at the trim and what looks like mohair's very hard on the screen. What do you think, Nassia, so far? What are your thoughts?
With a bit of textures, I really like Tuba's comment where sort of like we immediately see the lilac, but actually the clothes are like in more sort of like down to earth tones, in the sense of like we have the pastels and everything, which makes sense for summer, but we don't have anything that is very extreme to the apart from the animal print, which sort of like I'm expected to see again, I suppose, for the collection to have a logic. And
I mean, look at the stripes coming through now.
And what I see, I don't know, but the first thing that came to my mind, I feel that there's loads of things happening around here. So the collection is quite zoom ready. So you have the earrings, you have interesting necklines, loads of things are happening here rather than, in the rest of the silhouette. Yeah. And we have the stripes. Now, again, nothing really extreme. It's what we expected. I feel it goes more, again, well, it's not really living minimalism, but it goes to another route. I think it's just experimenting with just going to another target audience as well. And well, a brand has to do that in order to survive. So that's my understanding so far.
So Tuba, would you say that this had the femininity around it and a sort of purity around it, or is it more fuzzy than you would have liked?
Well, I think what we see here the strongest is I think these are very functional pieces. So these all wrapped up pieces seem to me like they're pieces that can be worn in a different way also. I wouldn't say these are strongly feminine pieces. Here we see the knitwear again. I think this is very interesting to see because we saw them at Bottega and we see that these strong knitted pieces are very successful actually, and still, and again, speak for this new time zone where we're in and everything is comfortable. They said that they also, well, they have that throughout their collections, that they usually get inspired by the nature also, which is very funny because it's like the biggest contrast to this exacting perfectionist work that they have when it comes to cuts and draping and stuff. And then again, on the other side, they have the nature inspiration, which is the exact opposite. I still feel like we see that here again because the fabrics and the colors that they have chosen seem very natural. It's not like very.
But I think there's a duality going on here because in fact the print and the knit and the stripes. Okay, and now we have what looks like a paisley. It's hard to tell. It is a paisley, I think. But I mean, we've got, that's about, is it nature or is it artifice in a natural way? It's just kind of bouncing off things. And I can see the comfort happening. We all want to put comfortable clothes down. It's goodbye suits to the office and all the rest of it. Jose, look at these sort of spring, summer blouson dresses.
But see, for example, that's where the quote unquote joy, that's where the color, that's where all of that comes in, right? That's where, and I think this is where it becomes a little bit more interesting to see that interpretation of what that colorfulness is, what that sort of rainbow, what those bright colors, those sorbet colors are under a Jil Sander sort of lens, right? I think that's what's relatively interesting. I think the stripe story is really, I mean, the stripes we saw in Resort as well, so I'm not really surprised that they're carrying those over. I'm sure they sold really well to the stores. This run of silhouettes of like the blouses I'm very interested by, especially when you look at the collection at large and you see that first run of the tailoring, and then you see the run of the crochet that feels very Bottega, I have to say, and then you see this run of larger pieces that I would not expect from a Jil Sander, but we have been seeing them from Valentino. We have been seeing them from, we saw them yesterday, even a Richard Quinn. We see them from Christopher John Rogers. So like those pieces exist. J.W. Anderson, etc. So like they are very current.
But
so
it's really interesting about the silhouette, isn't it? I mean, Nassia, this silhouette has completely changed, right?
And sort of like it reminds me of Simone Rocha in a way, which is very relevant. It's comfortable, yet luxurious, yet feminine and interesting. And to me, it just looks like a very fun collection. It just makes me smile because of the colors. It just has it doesn't have the strict and the heaviness of Jil Sanders with sort of like very constructed lines. It's soft. In a good way, and it's just fun. I really like it.
Okay, quick question as we're watching the finale here, and I'll come to each of you with the same question. As you're watching this, which outfit is making you go, oh God, I'd like to wear that. I'd like that. I want that, you know, male, female, whatever. What's speaking to you? Tuba.
It's definitely the suits again for me. These colorless ones also. This is the thing I'm craving for when I'm looking for Jil Sander. They're so good at outerwear. I was really scared to not see enough jackets, but we see the huge colors.
There's that leopard skin coat.
Is that? Oh my! Okay, this is very surprising. But I think I love this thing that doesn't even. What is this? It looks like it is a neck. Something that this fabric on the neck. I mean, this is the edginess that Jil Sander speaks. It's very soft, but it still has this laser cut on the jacket on it. So that was the strongest piece for me. I think it was actually the first look that I just could wear as it is on the runway. Like one.
That's fascinating. What about you, Nassia? As we're watching these closing sequences.
I saw a yellow dress. I think it's coming up in a bit with a very interesting neckline. There was a lot of happening on here, and I really liked it because again, it has the forms and the structure of minimalism, like very geometrical lines, but then it gives a bit of something extra, which I'm looking for in general right now. Although I love minimalism, but I'm going towards sort of like more extra and colors and and sparkling things.
And Jose, quick before they disappear, you said use all shapes, right?
I mean, that opening look for me was the winner. The tailoring is really special. I love that it doesn't have a lapels. And the yellow shirt dress, is also very special. I think it's interesting to just see them interpret all of these trends and everything that we see that is performing well under a Jil Sander lens. I think the styling is very important.
Very important. Was there a little hint of Balenciaga in those big blouson dresses, perhaps?
And like Pier Paolo Valentino, like all those names start coming up, right? And it's the fabrics as well, right? It's the fabrications of them.
I want to see those. I want to feel them.
Exactly. And it's like, okay, do you have them in cotton? Do you have them in a sort of like lacy or embroidered organza, like Alison Monrocha, like Nassia was saying? They're like, that's what's interesting to me. Also the styling of the crochet with the tailored trouser. That's interesting to me because it's telling me like, hey, this crochet polo is going to sit in the store right next to the Bottega, but under the Jil Sander lens, you're going to get it with your heeled pointy boot and your tailored trouser, right? I think that balance is interesting.
Yeah, I think that was really interesting. And also, I mean, Tuba, what I noticed here was that the accessories, when, you know, the last collection that we looked at, the last spring summer collection we looked at, you had those kind of great big kind of, you know, metallic bauble bags and the silver bullet boots and all of those things. They were huge. This seemed much more restrained, right?
Yes, that was also a bit surprising to me because I was actually still expecting like some plateau on the shoes because we saw them everywhere now. But I couldn't really focus on the shoes, but the handbags were very small.
Very small,
But we need to see images. But coming back to this knitwear over pants look, for example, I mean, I do not want to compare everything to Phoebe Celine, but this was like a very striking look of Phoebe, these knitwear pieces over pants. well.
No, I agree. And, you know, well, God, we could talk here all day. I have a funny feeling that our little slot might have run out. I mean, you know, hurrah, Luke and Lucie Meier, and well done them. But it remains to me to say thank you to all the panelists, Tuba, José, and Nassia. And thank you all for watching. For more extensive Fashion Week coverage, you know, this is the place, this is the channel, switch on to showstudio.com. And if you're watching via Show Studios YouTube, be sure to like and heart and comment and subscribe. And, you know, we'll see you next time. Thank you very much for watching. Bye.